Hello, everyone. I'm Mark.
And I'm Rob.
Today, we're going to talk about the college careers of Diana Taurasi versus Caitlin Clark, and I'm going to make the argument that Caitlin Clark was a better college player than Diana Taurasi. Welcome to Mark and Rob's Sports Showdown, one of the hottest and best sports talk shows in the universe. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Hit that notification bell when you do.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, it seems like people don't want to say Caitlin Clark was a great player because she doesn't have any championships, but she dragged two mediocre teams to the finals, and she only had one player that made it in the WNBA, and that is her good friend Kate Martin, and she's not even a starter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, meanwhile, Diana Taurasi played at Connecticut, had a great coach. They both had great coaches, but Gino's a better coach, and had 3 championships. But she played with 10 players that made it to the WNBA.
Wow.
Her sophomore year, she wasn't even the best player in the team. Sue Bird was, and Sue Bird was player of the year. So you can argue who the better player was, but Sue Bird was player of the year. Mm-hmm. Diana Taurasi was player of the year twice for Naismith, but only once for AP.
Okay.
And only once for the Basketball Writers Association.
Okay.
So Caitlin Clark was 2-time player of the year for all of them. So Diana Taurasi was only 2-time player of the year for one. The other 2 she didn't win.
Okay.
So she only won it one time in 2 of the 3 times that people voted for player of the year. So just right there, Caitlin Clark suggests to me she was a better player because people saw her as more dominant player for the last 2 seasons of their career. So Clark I would give her a 2.0 for player of the year. And I would give Taurasi a 1.33 because 2 times out of 3, she actually did not win it her junior year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm eliminating the Wade trophy because that's based upon things other than talent. For instance, Cheryl Miller only won it 1 time, which is crazy. She won it 3 times for the Naismith. So I eliminated that, which is to the benefit of Diana Taurasi because she didn't win that one either. Mm-hmm. So that would give her a 1.25. Okay, So All-American status. Caitlin Clark was 3 times first-team All-American. And her freshman year, she was second-team All-American. Taurasi was only 2 times first-team All-American. And her sophomore year, she was second-team. She didn't make All-American her freshman year. So advantage Clark on Player of the Year. Advantage Clark for All-American statuses for her career. Mm-hmm. We know Taurasi has 3 championships and Clark has none. Clark did make it to the finals twice. Clark, her junior year, beat one of the greatest teams of all time. There's only 15 undefeated teams in the history of women's basketball. 10 won the championship, only 5 lost. Clark beat one of those 5. And
Mark, let me stop you there, Mark. So Let's see. Taurasi's won 3 championships.
By herself.
By herself. So
I did ask her about on the Olympic team, and she said, after I won 3 championships, they put me on the Olympic team. And meanwhile, she wasn't even the best player on the team or one of the championships.
Right. So how could doesn't winning championships come into any kind of bearing of who's a better ball player?
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Okay.
We'll get into that. But Clark beat South Carolina her junior year in the semifinals, and it was a great accomplishment. But then she lost to an LSU team that was more talented. And then in her senior year, she had to beat Connecticut and LSU to get to the finals. That was in the Elite 8 and also in the Final 4. And then she lost to an undefeated South Carolina team. So she lost to really good teams. It's not like Clark choked in the finals. Both times she lost to teams that were better than hers. So LSU only had 2 losses that year. Iowa had 6 her junior year. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, if you watch the game, you see who had more talent. Angel Reese got MVP, and she was the 4th leading scorer in the game for LSU. Someone came off the bench and hit 5 threes out of 5 in the first half, So, all right. So, anyways, who's the better team? So Connecticut had a stacked team for all 3 years that they won the championship. And that's why they had so many players that made the WNBA. I actually think it's more impressive that Clark dragged these mediocre Iowa teams to the finals 2 years in a row than winning 3 championships on stacked team. That's my opinion. People who just count chips and goats is silly because Clark had gone to Connecticut. She would have won 4. She had gone to South Carolina. She would have won 5 and really pissed off Cheryl Swoops, who thinks she went there for 5 years. But she'd gone to any of these elite schools. She would have won 3 to 4 championships. And I don't think anybody's even questioning that.
Right.
So, I mean, you add a player of the year to these stacked teams. How could you not win a championship? Right.
Exactly.
And that's not even debatable. So the
I mean,
argument about you got to win championships to be better than someone is a silly argument in college. Now in pros, and you only have a 4-year career for women. Men, obviously, now you only have like a 1-year career, but you used to have a 4-year career and sometimes a 3-year career. But in the pros, I think that's a much better argument. Look in the NBA. The careers nowadays can last 20 years. You know, they used to last 13 when like Russell and Chamberlain played, but now they play like 15, 20 years. People can because of improved nutrition and medical.
Plus a lot more movement. I mean, as far as free agency, there's a lot more movement where if you don't want to be on a team, you can form your own super team like LeBron did and try to win a championship. That's the thing now.
Right. So if you want to argue, you have to get a championship in the pros, and you're talking about a basketball player or an NFL quarterback. I would 100% agree with you. That's a factor, and it's a major factor, especially for an NBA player. My argument is that if you're not good enough to drag a team to a championship at least once or twice in your career in the NBA, because everybody's eventually gets some good players around them, then you're not a GOAT. Okay. And then, in fact, nobody ranked in the top 10, except for possibly Oscar Robinson, has fewer than 2 championships. Oscar Robinson has 1. So that's a factor. They all have, anyone who's ranked in the top 10, it has at least 2 championships.
But college is different. But college is much more different than that.
Right. For instance, Karl Malone and Charles Barkley do not make people's top 10, and they have 0 championships. All right. And that's just the way it is. But they may be in the top 20. So if you want to be a GOAT or in the top 10, you need some championships at the pro level. I don't think anyone thinks Dan Marino is the best quarterback of all the time, as great as his arm was. Not when you got Tom Brady, who also had a great arm and has 7 championships.
So you're saying though in college though, even though she had 3 championships and she claims to be it's not just her who won those championships. So you can't say okay, well, she's the GOAT because she won 3 championships. You have to look a little deeper into why she won those championships, which was because they had a stacked team. And compared to Clark, who had to, like you said, bring up her team to even get to the Final Four or even the finals. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, I'm more impressed with what Clark did than what Diana Taurasi did. Right. I think what she did with those teams is amazing. And people who are so simplistic in terms of looking at chips and championships, it's like, what did they do? Look at the way Clark made her teammates better. She made her teammates better than anyone in the history of college women's basketball, in my opinion. And that's because she's an elite passer. She's the best passer in the history of women's basketball, pro or college, in my opinion. And a lot of other people think the same thing. And that's one of the keys to why she made her teammates better. Okay. And I know people say, okay, she didn't play any defense. So we're going to get into those stats. And also, I'm going to go in to show you there's some great players that didn't win championships at the college level. And I'll do that at the end because people are kind of anxious for me to compare the stats, I think, at this point in the video. So I'm going to get into that. I'm going to get into that right now. And I was shocked at how better Clark's stats were than Diana Taurasi's. Now, I'm going to preface that by saying if Diana Taurasi was playing on a weaker team like Clark was, her numbers would go up. Yeah. How much would they go up? It's just a guess. I have no idea. But when you see the major differences between them, you can see that, they wouldn't have gone up that much. And Rob, you can give your input when I give the stats. In terms if
the switched and Diana was on an Iowa type team, I think probably her shooting percentage might go. I mean, she'd probably have to shoot more, and score more, definitely, because otherwise the team's not going to win. And also her rebounding and passing would have to go up. It's just obvious. Otherwise, they're not going to win. And if she's that great a player, she's going to have to step up and say, okay, I got to be the person, and be the main person.
But if you're a Clark fan, I would argue her shooting percentage would go up because all the attention's on her. And when you've got so many other teammates there to spread the offense around, her shooting percentage would go up. So Clark's shooting percentage would go up. Everything else would have gone down if she would play it on a stacked team. So I get that. And vice versa for Taurasi. I think her shooting percentage would go down, but all other stats would probably go up.
Also, Mark.
Except for
Also, I
maybe,
think.
go ahead.
Also, she'll be the roles will be switched. She'll be getting triple team and double team. And I think you're right. She'll have to take more shots, but she's going to have a lot more pressure. It wouldn't be so easy because on the Connecticut team, who are you going to guard? You have these other star players, but if Taurasi is the main player on that team that scores. As a coach, you're going to double team or triple team her to shut her down.
Right. So let's go over some stats, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I'll go over Clark had better stats in several categories, so I will go over those. But by the way, neither one of them made all defensive team, so that's a wash right there.
Okay.
So if you want to talk about defense, okay. So I'll start with defense, just because people say, "Oh, Clark has lousy defense." By the way, we've gone over this in terms of her pro career. It's improving her defense, but her on-ball defense is her weakness. She's actually a very good off-the-ball defender, like team defense, and that's where she gets most of her steals from.
Right.
And she's also a great defensive rebounder. Those are both types of defense. And she led the Big Ten in either 2 or 3 years in a row for defensive rebounding as a guard, which is unbelievable. And for instance, if you want to compare the defensive category, Clark's steals in her college career were 1.5. Taurasi's were 1.2. So Clark's were better. Defensive rebounding. So we're just doing defensive rebounding right now, not rebounding. 6.7 for Clark, 4.1 for Taurasi. And Taurasi led in blocks 1.0 to 0.5 for Clark. I mean, okay. All right. So offensively, it's not even close. Clark, 28.4. Taurasi, 15.0. Assists, 8.2 to 4.5. These are all Clark advantages. Very stark. Big advantages. Total rebounds, 7.1 to 4.5. That's advantage Clark again. Assist to turnover ratio. Clark had the advantage, 1.8 to 1.6. If you're new to basketball, that's the number of assists to the number of turnovers, and that's a good indication in terms of how a point guard's doing. Sometimes it's better to have more assists to turnovers, obviously. 3-point percentage advantage Clark, 0.392 to 0.77. Free throws advantage Clark, 0.58 to 0.817. Okay, now Taurasi advantage. Okay, turnovers. Clark had more turnovers. Taurasi had 2.8. Clark had 4.6. Field goal percentage was almost a tie, but Taurasi was 4.69 to Clark 4.63. And 2-point field goal percentage, it was almost a tie, but Taurasi had the advantage, 553 to 547. So even the two things that she has an advantage on offensively were almost a tie, and she had an advantage on turnovers and blocks by a decent amount, because 1.0 to 0.5 is a good advantage.
So on the offense, I'm going to step in. The only thing I'll contest with the scoring, that Clark's averaged more points than Taurasi's, because Taurasi was on a team where she didn't have to be the leading scorer. She had other people around her. And the way Jean coaches, she would have gotten over 20 points or average 30 points a game, not even close.
Well, it depends. Gino didn't have a talent like Clark that could shoot the 3-point shot like that. So we don't know.
What I'm saying, but the reason why Diana didn't average that many points a game is because of that.
Absolutely. I said that when we started this, before we got to the stats. Taurasi would have averaged more than 15 points a game. But the difference between the two is pretty large. When you've got 28.4 to 15.0, there's no way Taurasi would have gone and played for that Iowa team and averaged 28 points a game.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I don't think so.
And there's no way Clark would have only averaged 15 points a game for Connecticut. So I don't think it would have made up a difference of 13 points by switching teams. That's just me. You can argue that, but I think the difference is huge. And same thing with the number of assists. This difference in the assists was huge. I understand Taurasi's not considered a point guard.
Yeah, she's not a passer.
But still, she's handling the ball a lot. When you're the best player in the team, your junior and senior year, she's handling the ball a lot.
Right.
So her assists weren't that great compared to Clark's. I mean, Clark 8.2 to 4.5 is a lot.
And with lesser players, you would think that with better players, she would just, like you said, just think if Clark had better players or anything, how much that assist rate would go up. They wouldn't be missing shots, or dropping or turnovers either.
And Clark was a better 3-point shooter percentage-wise. And I'm going to maintain what I said earlier. All her shooting percentages would have gone up. And the other two in the 2-pointer overall, they were almost tied. Just Taurasi had a slight advantage. But Clark's would have all gone up if she played for a stronger team. And Taurasi's would have gone down. So she's a better shooter. She's a better passer.
So Mark, it's not, as one comment asked us or says it in our comments, this is not a love affair for Clark. It's not like you're just throwing out these stats, or we're bringing up how good she is. You just pointed out the stats. The reason why.
I should have said this in the beginning of the thing. I hate Dan Taurasi, but I'm giving you just statistics here, and I'm giving you logical arguments. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, but Rob can tell you this. I'm good at being objective in sports because I put so much effort into doing that, and my dad was like that. And like when you fall season comes around and I cover the Green Bay Packers, my favorite team since I was 3 years old, you'll see I'm objective about them. I didn't think they were going to beat Dallas in the playoffs last year. My friend who was a Packer fan predicted them, and he was right. I was wrong. But it doesn't mean I'm perfect at it. But I'm very conscious of the fact that I hate Diana Taurasi, and I love Caitlin Clark as a basketball player. But I'm giving you statistics. These are just statistics. Evaluating them in other ways, like whether or not who making teammates better. That's of course that's a subjective thing.
And then we're also opinion on that. And then we're also, like you said, this love affair. Also, you're putting like what she needs to work on, what she still does. It's not just always yay Clark. We're not. We got our little
right. No, I admit she took time off. On defense at times when she was at Iowa. But that's because she carried 80% of the offense. And if she put the effort on defense, she'd be exhausted, number one. And number two, she'd get in foul trouble, and then the team would lose because they were so dependent on her. Diana Taurasi could get in foul trouble, and that team would still win. She could not play, and that team would still win.
Right. If she wasn't on that team, they still would have won.
So, yes, I am well aware of her defensive limitations, both in college and in pro. And, like I said, I'm objective about it. Her on-ball defense still isn't good to this day, as Rob has pointed out, because she doesn't bend her knees and she doesn't slide her feet properly, and that's why she struggles with it. So, anyways, that's how I see it. To me, I don't think it's a huge difference in ability levels between the two, but it's clear. It's clear that Clark is a better player in college than Diana Taurasi was, and that's what's upsetting about the Olympic team snub, is that Clark was a better college player than Taurasi, and Taurasi got added automatically even before she played in the WNBA onto the team without even debating whether they didn't wait to see whether she could play in the WNBA. They just put her on the team, and she admits that. She goes, "Yeah, I won 3 championships all by myself, even though she wasn't even the best player her sophomore year. Sue Bird didn't even help her, and then they put me on the team." She said that in an interview. So that's the difference. That's what upsetting about the Olympic thing is Clark was a better coach, and she didn't just get added on like Taurasi or Breanna Stewart. Now, Breanna Stewart was, I think, a better college player than Diana Taurasi, but I still don't think she's as good as Clark. But she won 4 championships and had 3, and she was 3-time player of the year, and they just stuck around right away too. Yeah. So because they went to UConn, UConn seems to get favored on the Olympic committee. So. Go ahead, Robert. You want to say something?
No, I was going to say you're exactly right. Yeah. So you can see what's going on here. Exactly. That's the bottom line. I mean, if you're going to when you're doing comparisons like that, you come up with, don't just do this like, oh, well, how can you say that? Oh, are you just saying that because you're really just a Clarkette, whatever, or Clarksy? No, we're doing it, or pointing out the point that this is going to be, I believe with Mark, she's going to be at least she could be one of the best players in the WNBA. You can see the potential there. So, why not talk about it? Why should we not talk about her?
Right. And you can see I'm not hiding from any disadvantages or advantages for either player. If there's something that I didn't think of that Diana Taurasi has an advantage in, then you can write it down in the comments if you're a Diana Taurasi fan. Yeah. But I think I brought up the major points in terms of that. I think Clark is a better leader than Diana Taurasi. And that's why I think she was able to drag those teams to the finals that weren't very good. So, but that's subjective too. But you can make the argument that I'm wrong about that. But if you think I'm missing something here, let me know. But I brought up all the advantages and disadvantages, all the weaknesses and strengths I can think of for both players. And I've heard enough discussions about both players to know which ones to bring up. So I'm not hiding anything, is what I'm trying to say. And if you think I am, then fine. Go down. If you're obsessed with chips, which I argue that's not true, I'm going to get to that right now in terms of pro player, in terms of college players, and I'm going to show you that that's a silly argument for someone arguing. Look at it. Sure, if they had won that game against LSU or they'd won that game against South Carolina, would you rate her a little bit higher? Of course, you'd rate her a little bit higher.
Yeah.
But again, she lost to two better teams in the finals. She didn't get have a team that was heavily favored and lost like the South Carolina team against the South Carolina team in the junior year. If there was a player of the year on South Carolina and she lost when they were undefeated against a weaker Iowa team, I would take that away from that person, whoever it is.
Plus she, like you said, plus the team that she was on didn't have the superstars on her team like the other teams did. And she got to the semifinals. She played against two teams that won championships. So, I mean, you got to give her some props on that.
And Clark played great. In those 12 games, she played great. She had 3 of the greatest games in the history of women's college basketball. So she's clutch. She had against Louisville, she had a 41-point triple-double. That's what got the publicity rolling. Mm-hmm. Then she scored 41 against a great South Carolina team with great defense. And the following year against LSU, she had another 41-point game with 12 assists. That's a 3. Show me all these great Diana Taurasi games in the NCAA tournaments that even come close to matching that.
Right. Not even close.
So I'm arguing that is part of the argument as to why you can't just count chips. You got to count the games they played in the NCAA tournaments too. There's all sorts of players in college basketball history. I'll do some men for you first. In terms of they were great players, even though they didn't win a championship. And they're considered Larry Bird, Pete Maravich, Mark McGuire, Kevin Durant, Blake Griffin, never won an NCAA championship. Tim Duncan, Wayman Tisdale, David Robinson, Glenn Robinson, Lionel Simmons, Shaquille O'Neal, Len Bias, Zion Williamson, Hank Gathers. They never even made the Final Four. And some of them played 4-year careers. So to say you're not great or can't be considered one of the greatest if you don't have a championship is a dumb argument, because all those players I mentioned are in the GOAT conversation or close to it. They're all considered great players, and many of them are in the GOAT conversation. Granted, they're not going to win it because Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Alcindor, he's probably going to win it because he got all those championships and Player of the Years. So we get that. But they're in the conversation. To say Caitlin Clark can't be in the conversation or can't even be the GOAT is a silly argument. Championships aren't as important as they are in college as they are in the pros. And I would argue I can make sure.
Yeah, some people will argue, hopefully they will. Some people will argue that, that you're wrong, that championships that's what makes the players. So that's good. Hopefully we get comments on that, and then they can call the show and debate you on that.
Well, the media has convinced people that championships are more important than they actually are.
Yeah.
And I can give you some examples how it's changed through history. And I'll put this in another video too, but Paul Hornung won the Heisman Trophy in 1955, I think it was. And he was on a 2-8 Notre Dame team. They didn't care that the team lost. They thought he was the best player, and he went to Notre Dame. Maybe he didn't deserve to win, but they all voted for him. That nowadays, he wouldn't even be in the top 100 in the voting. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't even get a 10th place vote. Mm-hmm. In 1958, I believe, Bob Pettit won the MVP award, and that's when the players were voting, and his team was under 500. Nowadays, again, he wouldn't get any votes.
Yeah, St. Louis Hawks, yeah.
So in order to justify who they're voting for at MVP throughout the years, even though the standards are exactly the same before, who's the best player, the media has changed it to the point where championships are more important than they should be in the MVP voting or who the best player is voting. Right. And that's changed. And that's where we get to the point where Jay Williams says the ridiculous comment that, well, she hasn't won a championship. I can't even consider her great. Not even one of the greats. He said, I can't even consider her great, which was perhaps the dumbest analogy in the history of comparing how great players are.
Right.
And he had a chance to walk it back. He didn't. he had a chance, but he didn't walk it back. And he just, because he won a championship at a stacked Duke team.
Yeah,
So
another
he was
one. Yeah,
basically
another player
saying,
had
"This is how
stats.
great
Yeah.
I am. I was player of the year and I won a championship. I'm in that conversation for GOAT, but
Right.
anyone who didn't is not."
Right.
And he went to Duke. So you can read into it what you want. But
Mm.
anyways, that's my take. Let me know if you disagree with me. I'm sure Taurasi fans disagree with me, but the numbers are pretty stark in my opinion. And like, again, even if you just look at the individual accomplishments, All-American accomplishments go advantage Clark, player of the year advantage Clark. Everything but the championships is advantage Clark, except for a slight advantage in a couple stats that we went over.
Right.
All right.
All right.
So anyways, that's our take for today. And Rob, anything you want to add to that?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. So, hey, guess what? Please subscribe and hit the notification bell when you do. And if you like this video, hit like. I expect anyone but Taurasi fans to like this video. And make some intelligent, non-insulting comments. Feel free to do that and join our live show Eastern Time, 7 to 8 on Mondays. And we'll see you in the next video.
All right. Peace out.